right? If we're talking about Christian cultural heritage, well, probably most of us, right, would immediately say Jesus. Okay. At the core of Christianity, whether we go universal or whether we go particular, at the core is Jesus. No matter what type of Christianity we're talking about, whether we're using it very broadly or whether we're using it very narrowly, Christianity has to do with Jesus. Okay. So, what about Jesus? Because when we think about Jesus, most of us would probably say, most of us that would identify as Christian today would probably say, Jesus is the Son of God. We might even put it in the context of Jesus is God in human form. So we say that's what it means to be Jesus. But let's think now about a very important question that a lot of people have asked that they think they have answered related to the founding of the United States. It's a very important political issue today, and you hear it frequently on the news. Sometimes, depending on the congregation, the church you're a part of, you might hear it frequently from the pulpit or in a Bible class or in prayer. A thought and ideology that suggests that the founders of the United States were Christians founding a Christian nation. But while there is certainly information that suggests the importance the founders placed on religion, and even the Christian form of religion, it's also important to recognize that a lot of those founders did not view Jesus as God in human form. They tended to be what we might call Unitarian instead of Trinitarian. A Trinitarian form of God suggests that God is three in one: Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Unitarian forms of God, which would also be present in Judaism and Islam, suggest that there is one God, solely one God. God is not three, God is solely one. So a lot of the founders believed that Jesus was simply a good human individual, and that any sort of divineness to Jesus, divinity to Jesus, had to do with the specific mission God had given him, and not the nature of Jesus, Jesus in himself, we might say. So, if we say to be Christian is to assume the deity of Jesus, what then does that do to the question of whether the United States and the founders were Christian? So it does complicate it a little bit. And I think in some very important ways that we have to grapple with because of how politicized this issue has become. So at various times throughout the scope of what we may call the history of Christianity, there have been people who have either claimed the name Christian for themselves, or others have identified as Christian who did not necessarily hold a view that Jesus was the Son of God in essence. However, I would say that probably most people today would say that an absolute minimum for Christianity and for something to be Christian is an assertion of Jesus being the Son of God and all that a traditional reading of the Bible entails. There are still some that I think that would identify as Christian today that would problematize that a little bit. But I think most people would probably fall under that umbrella. So what seems to be a simple question is actually a little bit more complex. And I think today, of course, we face a lot of challenges in a secular world that sometimes denies the existence of deity altogether, but also denies certain aspects of a traditional reading of the Bible, which is why I'm also having you watch a video from N.T. Wright, a scholar of New Testament. At the time the video was recorded, he was a bishop in the Church of England. Currently, he is not a bishop anymore. He is solely focused on academics at this point. Still an Anglican or a member of the Church of England, but not a bishop. So the other video has to do with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And again, this is a video. I could have condensed and repackaged what Wright says, but I think there's some important information that he provides for us to feel confident about the reasonableness of the resurrection. And the resurrection is a very key component of Jesus and his identity. And so I want you to take some time to view that video, take notes on that video regarding the ways in which the resurrection of Jesus is a reasonable historical conclusion of that being it. And there's other videos on YouTube as well. Certainly there are videos that deny the resurrection, but there are other videos. Gary Habermas is another who does an excellent job at talking about the reasonableness of Jesus Christ's resurrection. So I want you to take some time to interact with that video, think through that video, and some of the things that Wright is saying there regarding the resurrection. And certainly it's a statement of faith, right? We have to have faith in the resurrection, but there is a reasonableness to the resurrection that I want you to see as well. And so that's why I'm having you watch that video. So on one hand, Jesus, there's special claims about Jesus that are important if something is, that makes something Christian. Probably another component that most people would say is that being Christian or having something, Christianity is about a certain set of beliefs, what we might call orthodoxy, a word that means correct teaching. There are certain beliefs that are Christian beliefs, and then there are things that are false, that aren't true. So there would be a lot of differences about those beliefs. What are the central beliefs? But most that would identify as Christian would say that there is a central, there are certain truths, there are certain beliefs that one has to have in order to be a Christian. Probably most would also say that there are a certain set of actions, ritual, practices, orthopraxy, or correct practice. Right? There are certain things you do as a Christian. Here too there would be differences, but probably two that most would agree on is baptism and the Lord's Supper or communion or Eucharist. Now here too, a lot of differences. How it's practiced, how often, when it's practiced, right? But we would probably all agree, we could get all Christians to say there are certain things that, as a Christian, you ritualistically do. Right? And so if you're a Christian, you accept Jesus as the Son of God, you have certain other beliefs that are core beliefs, and there are certain practices that you engage in as a Christian. And then probably we'd also say, well, yes, there's the head knowledge and there's the outward action, but being a Christian is also a way of life. Right? And so being a Christian, we would say Christianity is about connection with Jesus Christ as the Son of God. It's about having a certain set of beliefs, right, intellectual component, a certain set of actions, and above all, a way of life. I live differently because I am Christian. And that all of these, again, a lot of diversity, but if we're talking very broad terms, all of these combine to make something Christian, or to make a person who does these things is Christian. But what makes something Christian? Right? Those are the kind of things that we would say, well, those kind of things make up what a person who is a Christian. But what makes something Christian? So we are talking about Christian culture. Right? What is it about that culture that makes it Christian? Faulkner is a Christian university. What is it that makes it Christian? What is it that makes something like a university, or a course, or a culture, or a civilization, or a government, these objects, these ideologies, what makes them Christian? Does it have to be, all about the same kind of things that makes me a Christian, makes a university Christian, or makes a government Christian? Right? A lot of people talk about they want a Christian government. What's a Christian government look like that makes it different from a non-Christian government, whether that's a secular government or a government of another religion? Right? Is it those things? Right? So a Christian university would say, well, promotes Jesus Christ as Lord, as the Son of God. It has a certain set of practices, a certain set of beliefs, encourages a way of life. I mean, the university, right? A university cannot have a way of life. It can encourage, or the people in the university can encourage a way of life, or enforce a way of life. How does that work when we turn to government? And the ways in which government works. But then culture. What is Christian culture? And what does that have to do with this idea of Christian cultural heritage? Well, we'll pick all of that up, and we'll talk about culture and heritage in the next session.